Okay, I'll say something about how this project started because it started out to be something very different. That's why in the program it's called A Tale of Two Donnybrooks. It all started because I was looking for a dog groomer in Donnybrook. And back one quickly. Thank you. I found one. I thought, this is great. I've got two dogs. I couldn't really bring them on the bus. I don't have a car, so I thought, well, this would be perfect. So I phoned up Fluffy Paws, and the phone was not in service. So I thought, oh, I wonder if they're still there. It was kind of odd to give a flat number, an apartment number anyway, but there you go. So I looked on Facebook, and yes, there they were, Fluffy Paws, Donnybrook. So I sent them a message, and I said, could you tell me how much you charge for two dogs? And I'm not very far from you, so I could take a short notice appointment. And I got a message back. Well, actually, you're about an hour from us because we're closer to Queenstown. And then I realized this was Fluffy Paws in Australia. So I sent them back a message. I hope they didn't think I was being smart. I sent them back a message and said, actually, you're a lot further than 1 hour from me because I'm in Donnybrook, Dublin. I didn't hear anything else. And then I think the next time I looked on the page, I couldn't find this, and I couldn't find the other one either. They'd changed from being a dog groomer to something else, so who knows what's going on there. Maybe they're money launderers. Anyway, so that was how this started. And so then Derek had the great idea. Derek is back there. Derek had a great idea that why don't we find out how many Donnybrooks there are, and maybe find out more about that Donnybrook. So we had this wonderful idea of having an exchange visit between someone from other Donnybrooks and this Donnybrook. Of course, that was completely unfeasible. But can you guess how many Donnybrooks we discovered in the world? And anybody guess how many other Donnybrooks there are? That's close. There may be more, but we found 8. And here they are. So I did a tiny bit of research on them to find out something. And I have a friend who is an Irish historian, Australian. He's a PhD in Irish Studies from Melbourne. So anyway, I asked him if he would write a paper about the Nashes, and because I had heard that people from this Donnybrook went to this Donnybrook in Queensland and founded it in the 1800s. So he wrote me back, well, actually 14 years ago, I wrote a paper on that. So go ahead and call your project A Tale of Two Donnybrooks, because I'll get that paper to you. And then he discovered that he didn't have a copy. The publisher had closed down who published it. He couldn't find the magazine. And he said, Glenda, it's very difficult. The only copy is in a shed in my sister's back garden in Perth. So just day before yesterday, he said, here it is, here's the paper. So he sent me the paper, and if people returned it yesterday, I can circulate it to you. So there were 5 families who left from here. And now he did research on the Australia end. It'd be very nice if somebody would find out where the Nashes lived, what their religion was, what their occupation was from this end. Because they went to Donnybrook, and it wasn't very successful. They tried sheep herding, and that didn't work. They tried farming, that didn't work. So they gave up and they left, and I don't know where they went or what they did after. There is another Donnybrook also in Australia. I don't know anything about that. But anyway, I'll pass this around. You can, if anyone wants to read more about the other Donnybrook. But the one thing I learned that all these Donnybrooks had in common was that they weren't as successful as this Donnybrook. None of them actually got very big. They were all founded in the 19th century. Most of them had something like a post office and a little shop. There's one in South Africa, was founded by a Scotsman. And I suspect that the ones who named it after Donnybrook Fair had actually been to the fair, because the fair would have been going until 1855 or in a less normal form till 1866. So they undoubtedly knew about the fair and maybe experienced it, as about 75,000 people went every day to that fair. But we'll come to that later on. So we'll take the next one. Now, I've lived in Donnybrook for 45 years. Despite my accent, I've been here that long. But that's just a blink of an eye as to how old Donnybrook really is. Donnybrook was old when Dublin was a couple of huts beside a ford on the river. So Donnybrook was here before Dublin really existed. And it was the home of a Celtic spiritual community. You know, does everybody know the old graveyard in Donnybrook? Everybody knows that? Okay, well, the old graveyard in Donnybrook was the site of St. Brock's Celtic spiritual community. And they had their own church there, which nothing exists, nothing remains of except the base of an 8th or 9th century cross. The place where they lived, there were also a group of monks. And the only thing that still exists from St. Brock is the actual well, St. Brock's Holy Well. Does everybody know where it is? Yeah, it's in the Eglinton Flats, Eglinton Square Flats. In the middle of, between 2 rows of red brick flats is the old well. There's no water in it now, but it's amazing that it's lasted for so many centuries. So there was a very large house built there in 1726 called Ballingeil House. And I'll pass this around because I've marked on it where the well is and what's there now. So I can ask you to pass that around for people. Just drop them to the back table when you get to Derek. Would you just drop them on the back table when they come to you? So when St. Brock was here, the nuns, I was told, were actually in charge of everything. So they were in charge of the monks as well. And there was probably according to Mr. Parkinson, who wrote a good book about the graveyard, it was probably a pagan site before that, because it was up high and it's round, although the wall may not have been there. But on this side, there was nothing but huge, dense forest, oaks, ancient forest. It must have been quite beautiful. And on this side, the river went into marshes, and it came much further in. And this was unfortunate because that meant the Vikings could easily come up the Dodder and slaughter people, which they did. In the 1800s, I don't know the exact year, on a place called Danesfield, just off Aylesbury Road, there is a place where they were digging for a foundation, and they found 600 bodies, men, women, and children, all, they presume, killed by Vikings. And they found one Viking buried, I think, standing up in the Viking tradition with 2 women beside him. So those people were eventually moved to a mass grave in Donnybrook Cemetery, which has about 7,000 known burials, but probably many more underneath. So will we move on to the next one? This is a little map that I'm circulating for you now of Ballingeil House. And Ballingeil House keeps coming up in this talk again and again for different reasons. But at the moment, just because it's where St. Brock's community and the monks had their community where they actually lived. I think the actual churchyard was the graveyard now. And of course, you know, there were 2 churches in Donnybrook Graveyard. There was the Protestant St. Mary's in the graveyard, and there's one wall still there. And there was the Catholic one, and the wall still standing is the one beside the Garda station. So those churches have both been moved to other locations. So next. Before we move on, I'd like for us to hear, the river, of course, has been here forever, and the river is still very beautiful. We'll be hearing more about the river later from Richard Good. But right now, we have a song, an original song about the River Dodder by Catherine Ann Cullen.
The Dodder rises in the hills of Dublin. From Bornabrina you can hear her bubbling. If peace you want, the Dodder will deliver. So dream a while and listen to the river. The heron stands a solitary hunter, a meditator on the water's wonder, still as a stone until he feels the quiver. To catch the trout, he listens to the river. The otter shy and secret in her hold, She wears the water's sheen upon her coat. At dawn and dusk to forage she'll endeavor. For frogs and fish she listens to the river. Sometimes a trickler and sometimes a pourer. But when rain swells and floods her, she's a roarer. Then all along her banks the cottage livers must leave their homes and listen to the river. Your dreams will ride her ripples like a swallow. And where the waters rush, your dreams will follow. They'll open to the sea that silver sliver. So let them go and listen to the river. Thank you. Thank you.
I can listen to that song over and over again. I just love it because she's a poet as well, and you can tell it if you listen to the lyrics carefully. And this is one of the early books written about Donnybrook. The great thing about this book is it's online now, so you can get it for free online. And it was published in 1860, and it's up to date right to the moment of 1859. It also has a very extensive annals in which the River Dodder floods many, many times over the course of the annals, among other things. And people are drowned, and carriages are washed away, and bridges are washed away. Because the very name Dodder, do you know what it means? Andhra. It means turbulent. So we have a very turbulent and wonderful river. Okay, so next slide. This is an image of the fair during the days when it was quite popular. And you can see that there's some children who are being in front, who are being served some meat from a table. But they also had large restaurants that could seat 150 people for dinner at a sitting. And they had, different levels of prices of things. So like they catered for the rich and they catered for the poor. And they also had entertainment. Like you see, Brown's Hibernian troupe was a vaudevillian troupe, I believe. So, next slide. This is my favorite image of Donnybrook Fair because this is a beautiful painting by the Scottish artist Erskine Nicol. And I think it's in the Tate Gallery. I don't think I mentioned that before, but it is. And this painting, he went to the fair, and this is painted from his being there in 1859. So, given that they were saying that the fair was really sort of like in decline anyway, the ones who wanted to shut it down said, it's in decline, it's not what it used to be, it's just a sort of like fewer people are coming. This puts the lie to that, because if you look at that painting, I don't know if that's 75,000, but I know it's still plenty of people that the fair was going strong. So, also in this fair, you can't see it from here, but there's a kind of a medieval sort of swing over here, which no doubt would have been used by people pulling ropes to make it go up and down. And then here we have a theater company, and it's Bell's American Circus, a circus company, Bell's American Circus. And they were actually touring Europe at the time. And Donnybrook was like really one of the high points. It'd be like going to the Point or, some big, event place for them. So, the next thing I want to say is that there was a wonderful song, an anonymous song, written in the 18th century, and we have the honor that Catherine Ann is going to sing it for us. I have a copy of it here, which you can look at. We'll circulate around. It's on the screen. If anybody knows it, I think she won't mind if you sing along. But it's quite intimidating because it's got an unusual melody. She'll explain that. And it also has an awful lot of words. But what I love about this is that it tells you what kind of people came to the fair, what kind of work they did, although some of them, they wouldn't know how they lived. And it also says, what they could do at the fair and what they could see at the fair. So it's a great piece of cultural history. And this is the European Year of Culture, so we might as well, participate in that. So I'll let Catherine come and sing that song for you.
To Donnybrook steer, all you sons of Parnassus, poor painters, poor poets, poor newsmen and knaves, to see what the fun is that all fun surpasses, the sorrow and sadness of green Erin's slaves. O Donnybrook jewel, full of mirth is your quiver, where all flock from Dublin to gape and to stare at two elegant bridges without e'er a river. Success to the humours of Donnybrook fair. Oh, you lads that are witty from famed Dublin city, and you that in pastime take any delight, to Donnybrook fly, for the time's drawing nigh, when fat pigs are hunted and lean cobblers fight, when maidens so swift run for a new shift, men muffled in sacks for a shirt they race there, their jockeys well booted and horses sure-footed, all keep up the humours of Donnybrook fair. Losing my words here. Brisk lads and young lasses can there fill their glasses with whiskey and send a full bumper around. Jig it off in a tent till their money's all spent, and spin like a top till they fall to the ground. Oh, Donnybrook capers to sweet catgut scrapers, they bother the vapours and drive away care. And what is more glorious, there's naught more uproarious, huzzah for the humours of Donnybrook fair.
Donnybrook was a hotbed of revolutionary fervor. I owe a lot to Sean Brennan and Turlock O'Brien, who did a lot of research on this but didn't have time to sort of build it into an activity. So we did a Patriot Trail walk in 2016, and we visited all the homes of people, and we had ghosts of the people who lived there speak to us. And now, today, I'm happy to say that some of those ghosts who never haunted this place have decided to come here anyway and speak to you about their lives. So, we will begin with, who are we beginning with? We're beginning with a volunteer from 1914, a De Valera volunteer.
You should have seen what happened in the AOH Hall. There was a meeting of the Donnybrook Brigade, where that fire station now stands. It was the 28th of September, 1914. We were there to discuss the call to arms by John Redmond to help defend the British Empire. He said this was our duty, to defend small nations, and that it would help us get home rule in the end. But De Valera was having none of it. He said that he disagreed entirely with this position and that the parting of ways had come. Then he said that they were obviously in two different camps on the matter, for and against enlistment. He said, those who side with Ireland will go to that side of the hall, and those who side with who would like to support the British Empire will take the other. There was a majority of 3 in the Redmondite camp. So Dev and his supporters had to walk out of the hall. I walked out with them. Dev's parting cry as he walked out of the hall was, "You will need us before you get home rule." We didn't know it then, but this was one of many splits around the country that split the Irish volunteer movement into the Redmondite and Owen MacNeill trenches. It was about 50 of us volunteers who marched out of the AOH Hall with Dev, and he continued on his drills in Donnybrook, and the parades were held in a field opposite Donnybrook Church. In a few short weeks, men dropped away, and there was one time only 7 of us left, not counting Dev. But even with that small number, De Valera carried on as if he had a full company keeping it together. The numbers were then increased when we were joined by the remains of the Dundrum Company, who had also parted ways with Redmond. We got a drill hall in Beaver Row, in the former Wesleyan Chapel, and our numbers soon increased to about 40 in the Donnybrook branch. And believe you me, we needed every man.
Hello, I am the ghost of Bridget O'Connor. My husband was Bat O'Connor and he was a builder. And he built our house, number 1 Brendan Road. Actually, he built all the houses on the entire road. And he built many houses in and around Donnybrook. He built in secret hiding places for men on the run and for weapons. I believe he called the road Brendan's Road after the patron saint of his native Kerry. I was not directly associated with any particular movement, but I did join the Gaelic League when I came to Dublin. My husband was already a member. He was a member of the Keating branch. We regularly attended classes together and other functions. I had my domestic occupations, of course. I had to take care of my house and my children. But I had to do everything all by myself because I couldn't have a maid living on our house. I couldn't even have a daily woman for security reasons. As well as teaching Irish, the Gaelic League was a recruiting grounds for the volunteers in the IRB. We had very important meetings in our house, and that's why I met such characters as Sean McDermott, Con Collins, Cathal Brewer, and Charlie Monaghan. Charlie Monaghan was a great man in connection with arms and ammunition. I was very glad to be able to be of such assistance to Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott developed neuritis in his leg and had to go to the Mater Hospital some months before the rising. My husband brought him out to our house for Christmas 1915. Against doctor's advice, he left the hospital because he was so determined to be involved in the Easter Rising. He stayed in our house for 5 weeks. And during those weeks, there wasn't one day that at least one of the leaders did not come to see him. And that's how I became acquainted with Major McBride, Thomas McDonough, and some of the other leaders, who I did not get to meet again because they lost their lives in the fight. In preparation for Easter 16, a large quantity of arms and ammunition were brought to our house at 1 Brendan Road. Mainly ammunition. Ammunition was hidden in our building plot, which was just up at the end of the road. 2 large boxes of cartridges were also brought to our house at Brendan Road and hidden in every available hiding spot in the house, even in the hollow curbs of the fireplaces. In the days leading up to the Easter Rising, the volunteers came to the house, singly, in pairs and in groups, to collect the ammunition and the cartridges. Not all the ammunition that was in the building plot was removed before the rising. On the Monday after the surrender, we were raided. We were raided many times after this, but this was the worst raid we ever had. The military expected to find men and ammunition, but they found nothing. They were so disappointed at finding nothing in the house that they asked me to bring them down to the building plot to see what they could find there. I walked them all around the grounds, actually over the spot where we had stored all the ammunition, but they found nothing. One of the soldiers said to me, "I'm so sorry for the disturbance, Mrs. O'Connor, but we just have to do our duty." I said, "It's all right. You got nothing anyway." It gave me great satisfaction to say, "You got nothing." During Easter week, my husband, Bat, was sent to Kerry to prepare for the rising that was planned there. I felt so alone. I was there with 5 young children. I was so anxious. I didn't know where he was. I had not seen or heard from him since he left for Kerry from our house on Good Friday. a message was brought to me a few days after the surrender. It was brought to me by a prisoner who'd been released, saying that my husband was in Richmond Barracks. The message was written on the little flap of an envelope in my husband Bat's handwriting, and it was signed for him by him. I'll never forget the relief at knowing and learning that he was still alive. I went to see him the next day, but we only had a couple of minutes together. We had to discuss business, and then he was sent to England to prison for 4 months, firstly in Wandsworth, and then he was sent to Frongoch in Wales. My husband Bat and Michael Collins formed a very strong friendship in prison, and when they were released, my husband assisted Michael Collins in reorganising the IRB network and also the Sinn Féin organisation. Our home during the War of Independence, and also number 23, where Michael Collins' secretary lived with her auntie, were safe houses for Michael. Number 6 he also frequented, and that was a house that was under the ownership of Dáil Éireann. Bat persuaded Michael Collins to go to London as part of the Anglo-Irish Treaty delegation. After Michael Collins had signed the treaty, he again came to visit, and he confided his despair. We could not have Michael Collins to stay very often in our house because it was too dangerous for him. However, he did stay 2 or 3 times. On one occasion, I remember being in the kitchen with Bat, my husband, Michael Collins, and also Harry Boland, talking about all the places they'd seen. Mick Collins talked about the life he'd led in London, and Bat, my husband, was describing how he's experienced America. Harry Boland, who was very gay and light-hearted, said, "Sure, there's no place like Dublin." He said to me, "There's nothing more I enjoy than taking an open outside car on a bank holiday with all my friends and going to the Strawberry Beds or some such place and singing the good old Dublin songs like Cockles and Mussels." When at last they decided to go to bed, Mick Collins and Harry Boland slept in the return room in the same bed. The window was slightly open in case they needed to escape should there have been a raid. I did not dare to go to bed because I was always in a state of anxiety whenever any of the leaders stayed in my house. However, I went up and I gently opened the door, and the 2 men were sleeping quietly. Mick Collins had his arm on the little table beside his bed, and beside it, lying there, was his revolver. Thomas Ashe, of whom my husband had a great opinion, came to stay with us for a week. He sang for us a song he had written, composed and put music to. And the song was called "Let Me Carry Your Cross for Ireland, Lord." On the morning before his arrest, he apologized to me for causing so much trouble. I remember him as he was then. He was such a beautiful man, with his tall, noble figure and his lovely wavy hair. I kept the letter that he sent me from Mountjoy prison. His death was the greatest tragedy of all. As time went on, meetings began to be held in our house again. It's when I got to know Austin Stack, Mick Collins was there, Cathal Brewer was there, and of course Michael Collins. I felt I knew Michael Collins the less because he was always so engrossed in important business, he had no time for small talk. The women that worked with him and for him overlooked that characteristic in him because they did not expect anything different, because they knew that he had so much on his mind. It gives me great solace to remember that I had the privilege of cooking, washing for, and putting up all these great men who sacrificed their lives for Ireland. And I'd be very happy to do it all over again.
I came back to Ireland in October 1901, and the following February I was married to Andrew Woods of Donnybrook. My father-in-law was a dairyman and a builder, and at first we lived in Eglinton Terrace in one of his houses.
I heard from the McLeans, who were in the Citizen Army, that there was going to be a rising. Now, I had nothing to do with it. But when the rising started, the people of Donnybrook were all just dumbfounded. But of course, I wasn't. I always regretted having nothing to do with it. I attended a Redmondite recruiting meeting for the freedom of small nations here in Kermit Park. I listened to a man boast about how he gave his son for the cause. He ranted and raved in bad rhyme about the glory of it all. I said what I had to say about sending young Irish men to fight for the British. Now, my eldest son, Tony, he was going to Pearse's school in Oakley Road. Mrs. O'Connor brought me into coming on, and I became active, working for them and for the volunteers. So, when our prisoners came back from British jails, I got the orders to meet them. I went in to a house in Parnell Square, I think it was number 25, and that's where I met them. And I would bring them, some of them home, Sean Etchingham, Liam Mellows, and Dick Mulcahy. Others I brought to Roebuck House. That belonged to Charlotte Desford, or to the O'Reillys nearby. Now, Andrew and I had plenty of friends who were also Republicans in Donnybrook at the time. He was close to De Valera, Arthur Griffith, and Dick Mulcahy. And the O'Reilly and De Valera were regular visitors to our house. I was close to Countess Markovich, Malcolm McBride, and Charlotte Desford. My home was an open house for volunteers, both officers and men. I left a window open in the front and in the back so that they could come in from all directions. The arms dump was upstairs, and all the members of 3rd Battalion E and M Company knew it. Now, I often wasn't there when they called, but one of the girls would go upstairs and get the arms that they wanted and feed them. I fed them all, and I gave them, I tried to collect clothes for them. I even gave them some of my husband's clothes. He wore it patiently. I gave him his second best top coat because he hadn't worn it for ages. And of course, the very next week he was looking for it. I think it was because he had given away his best and himself. Now, he said, next time you're giving away clothes, you should give them your own. I persuaded about 6 guards who were in Mountjoy prison to leave the Free State Army. I got into conversation with them. They had already been in the IRA. They asked me to get civilian clothes for them, which I did, and they came to my house, pretending to raid it. They were accompanied by Lil Kearns. She was posing as a woman searcher. Of course, Lil was in coming them on. I kept the uniforms, and they got the civilian clothes. 2 of them stayed that night with Mrs. Humphreys. Now, I never kept a man unless he had a revolver and ammunition. The first time I met Lee Mellows was in November 1920. He had just come back from the United States, where he had escaped in 1916. He came to our house asking for Mr. Quinn. Now, that was the name that Sean Etchingham, who was staying with me, went by. I was at the door letting out two young men from 2nd Battalion E Company, and Liam walked up the path, went straight through into the hall. I brought him upstairs, and I knew by the welcome that Sean Etchingham gave him that I hadn't made a mistake. Liam became a beloved member of our household. Volunteers from all over the country, particularly Galway, Clarenbridge and Killeenan, came to meet him there. It became his Dublin HQ. We were frequently raided. But Liam and Sean were both so cool that they saved themselves many times. However, I lived in dread of those raids.
Hello, Molly. Good to see you about these months, so to speak. So these people want to know a little bit more about my life. I was born in May, Manchester, in 1892, but grew up in County Wexford. I was an Irish Republican Sinn Féin politician, active in the IRB, and a founding member of the Irish Volunteers. At the age of 21, me and my company helped De Valera on a gun running mission from Howth to Dublin. I was then sent to Galway and settled on base at Athenry, where I met Sean McDermott, who in May 1915 at an anti-enlistment rally was arrested. I managed to escape, but then I was captured at Courtown Harbour and sent to Mountjoy Prison along with Sean for 3 months. Eventually I got out and started working. But then I was arrested again and sent to Arbor Hill Prison and then shipped to England. With the help of Nora and James Connolly, I managed to escape, disguised as a priest, and came back to Ireland to command the Western Division of the IRA in 1916 Easter Rising. I led about 700 men against the Irish Royal Constabulary in Ornamore and Clarenbridge in County Galway, till we eventually took up the town of Athenry. I met Molly during the War of Independence, when I was director of the IRA, responsible for buying arms and purchasing. In a 1918 general election, I was elected to the first Dáil as a Sinn Féin candidate for constituencies of North Meath and East Galway. Molly let me use her house as a base for the funding and supply of arms to the Irish Volunteers. I shared her room with another volunteer called Sean Etchingham. In 1921, December, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed. The British must have known this would lead to civil war. The civil war lasted from May 1922 to June 1923. During this period, 77 members of the Irish Free State Army executed 77 members of the anti-treaty side. I was against the treaty. I fundamentally believed that it undermined the principles of the Republic which we had fought for. In June 1922, me, Joe McKelvey, Rory O'Connor and Richard Barrett occupied the Four Courts. The anti-treaty side had been occupying it since April. However, 2 days later, after heavy bombardment by the Irish Free State Army, we surrendered. I had the chance to escape, but did not take it. And me, Barrett O'Connor, and McKelvey were sent to Mountjoy Prison without a trial. In In my spare time, I carved chess pieces out of wood. Till one day at 3:30 a.m. we were told that he would be executed at 8 a.m. as a reprisal for the death of Sean Hales. I used my limited time left to write to my loved ones. I remember I wrote to my mother Sarah at 5 a.m. Time is short. And much that must be said must go unsaid. At times like this, heart speaks to heart. I believed in the pre-treaty vision of the Republic which we had fought for. My dying wish was that my fellow Irishmen would one day be united in this vision, but I would not live to see it. At 8 a.m, we were taken from ourselves and executed by firing squad.
We were devastated when we heard the news. The first time I saw my husband cry was when he heard of your execution. Andrew came with me to claim your body. We took the car, and on the way we met Mrs. Despard and Mrs. McBride. We went to fetch your mother and drove to Mountjoy and asked that your body be released into our custody, but to no satisfaction. We then went to Tim Healy's house in the Liffey Valley, but as we got to the gate we were halted. A soldier, a Free State soldier, who was from Donnybrook and who had already been in the British Army, recognised me and said, "No, Mrs. Woods, you can't come in." He got another soldier to come over and take a message to His Excellency. We demanded the body of Liam Mells executed that morning. But the soldier came back with a message that there was nothing His Excellency could do in this matter, and that it was to Garrod O'Sullivan, the Adjutant General, we would have to go. So we then went to Michael Conyon and asked him to take the necessary steps. He rang someone and made our request, but immediately the phone went dead. We didn't succeed in any further contact. You were buried in Mountjoy. But years later, when De Valera was in power, your body was taken and buried in Castleton Cemetery in County Wexford, a few miles from Arklow, near where your mother's people were born. An annual commemoration ceremony is held at your gravesite. You are not forgotten. But such a waste, such promise. You were only 27.
Let's get on to the ghost stories, which is my favorite part of this. And there's so many ghost stories. I just picked 3 examples. Okay? The first example actually is a murder. And all of these come back to Bellendale House in a mysterious way. So, sorry? Sure, yeah. So, in 1925, there was a young woman named Elizabeth O'Neill, and she had a pseudonym, Honor Bright, which I think is an amazing name as well, Honor Bright. I don't know if she was a prostitute, I don't know if she was just a young girl who was unlucky, but a man was walking to work up in the Dublin Mountains, and he saw a girl lying on the side of the road. And he thought perhaps that she was unconscious, and he went over to her and turned her over, and there was blood all over her. She'd been shot in the chest at close range. So he was quite horrified, and there was very few phones and things in 1925. So he walked 3 miles back to Dundrum police station to report the incident. And this story connects with Bellendale. I'll show you how it connects. Like, I read about it in the real Donnybrook. Now, I will say that poor old Richard Lattimore has been much criticized because he evidently took material online from P.J. Lennon and incorporated it into his book without giving proper credit. But he had other stuff in here that I don't think P.J. Lennon wrote, so I don't know where he got that. But the story of this girl, she was identified. They knew who she was. But nobody came to claim the remains. Nobody claimed her body. And she was from Donnybrook, but we don't know where. And it was reported in the papers that if the body wasn't claimed by the 12th of June, 1925, that she'd be buried by the local authorities. And she was, in an unmarked grave in Kilgobbin Cemetery. And she was only in her 20s. Now, an inquest was held in Sandyford National School in July. And the coroner, Dr. Lennon, complained about lack of public spirit because a number of jurors didn't even turn up for it. And the girl had obviously died from a gunshot wound to the chest, and she had been shot from between 6 and 10 feet away. And one of the two men, there were two men who were suspected of the crime. One of them was a 30-year-old doctor from Blessington. The other was a former Garda from Dunlavin County Wicklow. Now, there seemed to be good evidence that these men were involved in this crime. The public prosecutor was Mr. William Carrington, QC. Here's where the Bellendale connection comes in. He lived in Bellendale House. At this stage, it was no longer the 1725 house. It was the 1725 house, plus extensions here and extensions there. It was quite amazing. But he lived there, and he knew that he was positive that both men were guilty. And there's questions that were never answered, like a taxi man turned up with a gun that had been shot to kill him. And he was asked where he got it. He said, I bought it from a friend. Nobody ever inquired who the friend was, you know? And when the jury returned a verdict of not guilty, Mr. Carrington, who was an honest man, was so shattered that the corruption that he retired from public service immediately after the case and didn't practice law anymore. Didn't think it was worth it. Now here's where the ghost story comes in. She was killed in June, and by July and August, after she was buried, her ghost started to appear to people in Bellendale House. Several people reported seeing a young woman that they believed was her, and she seemed to be talking to a man, but they couldn't ever see the man. They just saw the girl speaking as if she was speaking to someone else. And nobody knows whether she was talking to her murderer or she was talking to someone else, but she was seen in, active conversation with someone as a ghost. Nothing was heard, they just saw her. So that's one of the ghosts. And the murder was still never solved. And it looks like the two guilty men, maybe because they were a Garda and a doctor, they got away with it. You know that a world-famous ghost hunter came to Donnybrook in 1966. His name was Hans Holzer. And he came to Donnybrook, and he wrote a book called The Lively Ghost of Ireland, in which there's a whole chapter on Bellendale House and his visit there. He and his wife liked it so much they wanted to buy it. But the man who owned it at that stage, Arthur Lurie, had already decided to demolish it and build red brick flats, which are there now. So he raised the price so high that it was out of the reach of a ghost hunter and his wife. But they seriously considered it. They like ghosts. They think ghosts are harmless. They had the windows smashed. The conservatory was a wreck. The gardens weren't tended. Everything was like being let fall apart, probably deliberately, as they wanted to knock it down. It's a pity it wasn't preserved. It was an amazing, amazing place. But in any case, the party sounds. The family would go to bed upstairs, and they would hear the sounds of the party down below. And Mrs. Healy, for example, one evening, her son went out for dinner. He was living in the house with her, and she told him to be very quiet when he came back in because she'd be asleep. So what did she hear? He's coming in with a gang of people, and they're laughing and talking and playing music and dancing, and she is just so annoyed. And she goes downstairs to give out to him, and there's nobody there, and the sound has disappeared. And he comes in a little while later, and she says, "Where did you and all those people go that you brought in earlier?" And he said, "I wasn't in earlier. I've just come home now by myself. What are you talking about?" And sometimes the police would go by, and they would hear sounds in the houses and knock on the door and nothing would be going on. And this actually happened to Hans Holzer. He said they heard these sounds in the house, and it sounded like a party, and it sounded also like the voices were something underwater. So I told this story to a very skeptical neighbor of mine, Jim Brennan, who now is in the hospital in Konski, but he lived in Beaver Road and a very good friend. And very wise man. He says, "Glenda, this is ridiculous. There's a perfectly simple explanation to this. All these houses have tunnels underneath. My house, number 4, was a Cayley house. If you pull up the carpet, you can see the marks of all the heels where they danced. For years they danced here." He says, "What would happen is there were tunnels that went all over the place. Under your house, under my house, all over the place. Old tunnels from before the houses were built. And these tunnels went under the river, and one went into Ballingal House. So when the wind would blow a certain way, the party sounds would carry in, and then when it would stop or blow a different way, it would disappear." Now, I actually experienced something like this once in my house at number 9. Upstairs in the old chapel, there were 2 rooms put in for children by a carpenter in the 1920s. I think it was the McGinn family. McGinn are here today. But I heard a radio on upstairs, and somebody's been up there, and they left the radio on. So I went upstairs, turned the radio off, and not only was the radio not on, there was no radio in the room. And I looked and thought, well, it must be, there's no sound when I got up there. So I went downstairs again, and just as I was leaving the chapel, I heard the radio again. So I thought, it must be under the bed or something. Let me go up and turn that radio off. I went back upstairs, and the sound stopped, and there was no radio. So I don't think that's because of the tunnel, although I was told that there was a tunnel under my house, but nobody's ever actually seen it who lived there. So these tunnels could have been from Viking days when people were trying to escape. The river was so dangerous that if you were facing a Viking sword, if you threw yourself in the river, it would be instant death as well. So that's kind of an interesting story, and also that the Holzers experienced it. So 1966, Mr. Holzer, who's written books about everywhere, about ghosts everywhere. We'll go to the next slide. This man here on the left, ghost hunter, well-known, Austrian-born, lived in New York. He met a British medium named Sybil Leek, who is now living in the States. And a lot of people thought she was a fake or some sort of a witch or something, but he thought she was really, really good. And most of her observations, you go into a trance state as she is here. The actor's training happened, and there is Sybil Leek going into a trance, recalling something about a ghost called Hungry Lucy. Hungry Lucy's nothing to do with Ireland as far as I know. But anyway, so Hans is asking her questions, she's giving him answers. Now, one thing she came up with about Ballingal House was there was a great iron gate. And when they got there, there was no iron gate. And she said, "No, there has to be an iron gate. I saw the iron gate. It's the main entrance to the house." So they talked to Mrs. Healy, and she says, "Well, there was an iron gate there, but I had it removed, and then we moved the entrance to a new place." And she also got the name White, came to her, and Bantry White had owned the house at one time as well. Now, one thing that's interesting to me is I have never been able to find a photograph of this house, a drawing of this house, anything. Bantry Wright wrote an article for an historical journal some years ago, and the only picture illustrating that article of the old house at Donnybrook was a picture of a fireplace that was in it. So I mentioned last week that he has a daughter, Alexandra, who's alive. Now, I meant to get in touch with him for years. Didn't know how to get in touch with him. A friend of mine came over, did something on the computer, and said, "Here's his phone number, ring him up." Now, unfortunately, I didn't do that.
And a couple of years later, when I found the phone number again, it was 2009 and he had just died. So I missed him, unless he comes back with a ghost. But since last week, I looked up Alexandra Holzer online, and she also is a ghost hunter. She and her husband do ghost tours, ghost hunting. They'll come to your house probably for a charge if you have a ghost you want examined. And I have sent a message to her saying, I know that her father, when he was here, took photographs and videos of Falmouth House. And is there any chance they're still in the archives? So watch this space. Hopefully she'll get back to me with some news. You know? I will tell one more tiny ghost story, because I said to somebody I would tell this. Like, when my daughter was 3, we had some friends over in the kitchen. We're all sitting around the table and animated conversation. I suddenly look around and my 3-year-old is gone. Where is she? And at the time, the chapel at the back of the house, this is the chapel, you can pass that around. That's the old chapel. It's still there. I do. I have the chapel of the Wesleyan Hatters. But it's part of the house. They thought it was a shed when I bought it. But anyway, she had gone back into the old chapel, and at that stage it was completely empty. And she came back in and said, "Where were you? We were so worried about you." She said, Beaver Row, it's behind Beaver Row, which was really the front of the house. This is another story. So she comes back in and I say, "Where were you?" And she says, "I was talking to the old people." And I said, "What old people?" "The ones sitting on the sofa." She said, "They put me up on the sofa beside them and they were very nice to me." Now there was no sofa and there were no old people. And she had some kind of ghostly experience, obviously, you know. She's a bit psychic herself. But anyway, let's get back now. The explanation for the sounds of the parties going in and out of the house. You either have to believe in the fact that there's ghosts, or you have to believe in the fact that there's tunnels. So take your choice. Do you believe in the tunnel story, or do you believe in the ghost story? And I don't know which is true. Probably the tunnels, but who knows? I was looking up Hans Holzer, and Alexander Holzer, his daughter. I discovered this about Dan Aykroyd. Now, Dan Aykroyd, you may remember, was the writer and the actor for Ghostbusters, which is a great film. So I found this little clipping about him. He says, "One of my symptoms," and this is, I don't know what he's talking about, he must have a mental condition. "One of my symptoms was an obsession with ghosts and law enforcement. I used to carry around a police badge with me. For example, I became obsessed by Hans Holzer, the greatest ghost hunter ever. And that's when the idea of my film Ghostbusters was born." So if it hadn't been for Hans Holzer, we might never have got, at least not got the first Ghostbusters, we got the second. So I think that's enough of ghosts for now. Like, if I'm going to have one last original song by Catherine Ann, which is A Dollar on the Dollar. And then we'll...
There are waves of rivers flowing through the town I call my own. And I polka by the Tonka, and I shimmy by the Swan. Oh, I bargle up a dargle on the Dell and I would toss. And I paddle in the pond all the way to Harold's Cross. Though the liffey can be whiffy, I would never hold my nose. But I'd fonder of a donder where the Dodder River flows. From Hyde the Pure with Compass Shore to Glenasmole she'll fare. And folks in town swear they've seen her shopping in the square. From Fir House to Rathfarnham on to Templeogue for tea. Then it's not far from old Rathgar to Milton and Clonskeagh. Through Donnybrook and Paul's Bridge to the Grand Canal she goes. You can ponder as you wander where the Dodder River flows. With her ribbon loosely raveling across South Dublin town. She's a sparkling of silver and a turbulence of brown. Lamenting for her sisters, the Paddle and the Swan, who've been swallowed up in concrete coats for many miles along. Still she's proudly sitting naked in the way that nature chose. So I'm fonder of the Donder where the Dodder River flows. Where the otter likes to potter, where the hare loves to pose. I'm fonder of the Donder where the Dodder River flows. Thank you.
mention this book. This is called The River Dodder and Pottle. It's great. It came out a couple of years ago. And it's got a lot of information, historical information on the river. The Dodder, which starts up in the Dublin Mountains up in Capure and travels all the way down past here, about 3 or 4, the other side of the path. And then it heads on down through Gulf Bridge and down to the sea. And there's always been mills along the Dodder for the last 200 or 300 years. These are 2 retired civil engineers from the city council, and they wrote this book, which is great because it's got a lot of history in it. A building going on, and it'll keep going on. But heritage is important, like what you can hear, which is cultural heritage. But there's also physical heritage. Now, I found over the years that it helps if you've got something protected, or if it's a monument, and so on. Like the Methodist chapel there in Beaver Road, that's a protected structure. The Iron Footbridge over the Dodder, that's a protected structure. Which meant when they went to restore it, they wanted to replace it with another modern bridge. But because it was a protected structure, they had to do it, restore it. And they did a lovely job in the end. If anybody knows it, it's worth going up and having a look more across it. And then the Holy Well that Glenn also mentioned up in the grounds there at Banbad, that's a national monument. And there's part of the graveyard is a national monument as well. Though the whole of Donnybrook was what they call a zone of archaeological interest. For some reason or other, that's become a redundant record, whatever that means. I haven't been able to find out what they mean by a redundant record. But it's still the zone of archaeological interest on the Dublin City Development Plan. So that's the sort of thing, like when the next plan comes up, is to write in, if you ever think of it, and say, could they keep it as a zone of archaeological interest? Because it means then any building that has to go on, they have to do an archaeological assessment and so on. But it just helps, because otherwise the next thing you find, you wake up one morning and then something's gone, and then, whereas if it's got some kind of protection, you've got some chance of keeping it. So this is what this is about, really. There's a mill race. I live in Beaver Road, well, and there's a mill race, the remains of it. It's the last remaining section of a mill race that ran from Beaver Road here to Irish Town for hundreds of years, providing water power. So this is what this is about, is trying to get in ahead of any proposal for development and hoping that it can stop it, or at least make sure that they allow for it. Okay, so it's a bit about what a mill race is, because I'm not sure that everybody knows about it. And it's a bit about where the mill race goes. And then, just with this, the idea, I've sent this off to the Dublin City Council, and I'm going to send it off to a few more places in the hope that it can be preserved. So anyway, enough of that. So if you want to carry on, next one. Okay, now this is Beaver Road, where as it is, or as it was maybe 12 years ago. Look, this is the best, where it looks its best. This is the city side. If you're going up through Donnybrook and turn left, you come out there. And Brookfield Road, this is the view up, looking upriver. Beaver Road cottages are behind those trees over there. And there's a walkway up here. And on the inside of that is the mill race, or where the remains, or where the mill race is, but it's buried. Now, there's a reason for these two paths. This one is because a mill race has to keep up at a certain height. Now, I'll come to that in a minute. But basically, it's a 200-year-old landscape. So the landscape itself is heritage. If you're walking down there, I just encourage you to go for a stroll down that lower walk, because it's like you're in the country. There's nice, interesting rock formations over here. There's all the trees that are all the way along. And then up the top, the footbridge is just back here about 100 yards. And then up at the top of here, there's what we call the weir, or the waterfall. And as I say, it's the mill race which runs along here, not on the path, but just behind those railings. it's a conservation area, which is a help, but then sometimes the planners don't pay any attention to conservation areas. So anyway, carry on next one. This is the waterfall. I think I had a photo of it over earlier, and this is when it's in full flood. Ashton's pub is just up there, and that's the Riverside Walk Apartments. And then the water comes down, coming down from Milltown, and it comes along here and it comes down through the waterfall. Now, this is kind of a natural weir, in the sense that a weir keeps water up at a certain level. So they were able to turn it into a weir by filling in the top and making it flat. And then the height difference is important because water has potential energy, which is potential to do work. If you go back to engineering, that idea that if you've got water up at the height, it's useful to you. Once it comes down, it loses that potential energy. It kind of turns into kinetic energy, flying down. But then it just goes back and stays down here. So you want to be able to keep the water up at that height. That's what I'm saying. So next view. This is just a little sketch to give you the idea. Mill race is carrying water from a river to drive a mill wheel. The water runs along and you have a wheel made out of cast iron or wood. That turns with the little paddles on the outside. So the water goes this way, the paddle goes around that way. And that wheel can turn an axle and can drive a machine. Like the photograph or the print that Brenda had of the inside of the hat factory. You can see those big old belt drives up in the roof. So you could arrange gears to use that wheel then to drive those gears, which could turn those wheels, which could do the various things. So that's the idea of it. Where the mill race comes in is if you want to put your mill away from the river, you need a weir, which is like a waterfall. So the water comes along here, it stays up at this height, and then you divert it around here into the mill, and then allow it to return back to the river. So that's the function of the mill race. The Beaver Row weir didn't just serve one mill, it served a whole succession of mills. As you see. Let's go on to the next one. This is an old postcard of Beaver Row. It hasn't really changed in 200 years. There are the cottages over there. If you go up to the back of the weir and look down, you can see sort of the same view. The path's still there, so trying to kind of hold on to that path as well and keep it, because I always want to widen it and put in cantilevers and nice tarmac and floodlights and CCTV camera and so on and so forth. So to try and keep something up there. That's the top of the weir. The water used to fly over there. The old footbridge you can just make out in the background, that's down here. Donnybrook Church would be just there behind it. And down along here, the water came out through a little archway under that path and travelled all the way down along here. And this is a retaining wall because you had to keep it up at a certain height. So, I mean, they figured this out hundreds of years ago. Because mill races go back thousands of years. So that wall is still there, that path is still there, and the mill race, as I said, the mill race is covered in, but it's still there, and that's what we're trying to hoping to get conserved. So again, this is making the point, the mill race couldn't go this way because it's higher ground. So it had to stay parallel to the river to keep the same height. That's the crucial part of it. And then after 130 metres, which is what's left, it reaches Brookvale Road and turns inland. This is a map to show how it was in 1908. This is the weir. We drew it that way. Ashton's pub is here. This is the path. It went down all the way to Brookvale Road. And inside those railings is where the mill race ran. It ran up from the corner here and followed along there and around there. This is Beaver Road cottages down here. You can't quite see the church. It's just around there. So you can walk that path. You go down by Ashton's and walk along to Brookvale Road. And What's really nice to do, to do most days, is because I live over here, you kind of walk over the footbridge, you can walk up here along this path, and then go down and come back along the footpath. It makes a nice little circular walk. Okay. This drawing now you've seen already. This shows the mill race going back to 1728. Anyway, that's the mill race. This is Ballingride, that is the Brenda was talking about. That's the old Donnybrook Road, and this is the kind of later Donnybrook Road. Eglinton Road runs up along here. The elm trees attached to this house here. And the mill race ran along here and then serviced a mill, a sawmill, just around there, where the Magdalen Common is. Yeah. Okay. And then this is to kind of show you the full extent of the mill race. There's actually a walk on next Saturday. There's a historian, Ron Goodbody, who's actually he's going to start up at Clonsky House, which is up here. I think it's at 2 o'clock. They're meeting the car park. And he's going to walk the whole length all the way down. And just to find the various traces left. Because nearly everything's gone except for this bit. This single bit that we're talking about. So this is the weir. That's where Ashton's is. That's the Clonsky Road going around there. And Ashton's is here, the path's down here. And the mill race started at the weir, that's the weir. And then ran along here, turned left, that's where the hat factory was, just around the corner of present-day Anglesey Road, or Eglinton Road, and Eglinton Park. Then went on up into Donnybrook. There was a sawmill just here that you saw on the previous drawing. Then it turned around here. It couldn't go this way because that's higher ground, which counts to the bend in the road really, because where the cemetery is, it's all higher ground. And then it went past there, over the Donnybrook Road, then down to here, towards Herbert Park, and there was a peach mill there. And then it travelled all the way down to where the old Johnson and O'Brien was here. And the river, is, in the meantime, is all travelling this way. And this all the time it was staying up about 3 metres higher, keeping its energy. And when the water came out, it was a little bit of energy in the hat factory, but then it gained a little bit more as it went downhill. And then it would operate the sawmill, and then it would keep going, and it would operate the bleach mill, and then it kept going. And this is a mill pond, which is a storage device. Then you go on to the next picture. And that's the mill pond again in Balls Bridge. Travelled past there was a calico and cotton mill there in the 1830s. Duffy's, I think, ground. And then it went under the Balls Bridge Road, which is here. And then travelled all the way down underneath the railway, the old railway going along there, to a flour mill down here. Now in the 1700s it went even further, but by then, by the 1800s, the river had been actually redirected to go this way. So the mill race finally got to there and then went back into the river. So that's, say, 2 kilometres distance altogether, or 1.5 miles. And I mean, so it's like it's an engineering feat, but it's also like educational, because just to see how do they manage all of that. Now, unfortunately, I was looking at the archaeological records of a couple of the places trying to find out how old it was, but basically everything's been destroyed, and there was an archaeological assessment done, and then, but that's it, and then they preserve it by record, which is a dreadful kind of phrase, I think. So basically it means that they could go ahead and build whatever they're going to build, and we'll record what was there, but they won't keep what's there. So again, it's back to this idea of trying to hang on to what we can, and to some, I think it's a chance of hanging on to what this bit of mill is. On to the next one. But this is just a little comment on the heritage of this mill race, of what might have happened if it wasn't there. The hat factory was located and this is the cottages they built. So, I mean, they might have put a factory there anyway, but they needed water for the process and for the machines. So it was a handy place to put the hat factory on top of the mill race. Because of the hat factory, then they brought all the workers over and built the cottages and the chapel that's there. And then the wooden footbridge, which turned into an iron footbridge. And I suppose the point being, basically, if the mill race hadn't been there, well, the hat factory mightn't be there, but who knows what would happen, something else would happen. But it's this idea of heritage, that's how this area was formed or developed. And the same applies to Ball's Bridge, the same applies to Donnybrook. It would have influenced it to a certain extent. And that's what heritage is about, really. Somebody was just quoting from, if you lose your heritage, you can't remember the past, but you also can't understand the present, and you can't do anything much about the future either. So that's why it's kind of important to keep what you can and do what you can. So, on to the last slide then. This is now, unfortunately, it's been neglected, but it's also because it's been neglected because there's not a lot. Well, not so far. There isn't a proposal to build there. It's too narrow and it's too near the river. At the same time, that neglect means that it's still there. So this is actually where the mill race is. There's trees growing in it, but that could be an issue. But the mill race itself is probably stone. It's buried about a metre or so underneath the ground, underneath the top there. This is the access artery. That's still there. That's kind of stone arch. And if you go up along that path, you can see it. This is the top of the weir. That's the path running back up towards Ashton's will be up here. So that archway is still there. It's blocked up, but you could open up. There's a gate, or a bit to remains of a gate which controls the flow. And then there's a vague possibility that if, and it would depend on archaeological excavations and what's under there, if it's still there, or if it's not, you can still preserve it. And it's kind of educational because it kind of explains to people that, well, this whole idea of having to support it up at a certain height, this is a retaining wall. And that this goes back at least 300 or 400 years, possibly more. We just don't know until you do these excavations. So, this is my proposal, or proposal so far, is to preserve and enhance it, to do trial excavations and maybe restore some flow into the river. Okay. So, as I say, these have to go, and whether it works or not. But it does, anyway, hopefully that you get the idea and a little bit of sort of connected history. Okay, so, thank you very much.